The leaders we've had from 1966 to date are puppet leaders.
How would you react if we told you that the leaders who have been ruling African nations for decades are Western puppets? Uganda's leader, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni Tibuhaburwa, has been in power since 1986, and there are allegations that he is a Western puppet. If not, staying in power for this long is not justified. Julius Malema has come forward, talking about these leaders and telling them they don't own Africa. If they want Africa to progress, it is time to release power. Instead of making politics a family business, these leaders should prioritize public interest first. But will they give up their power? Let's find out. African leaders who have been in power for a long time have become a topic of debate throughout Africa. Julius Malema recently expressed his anger towards such leaders who have ruled African nations for decades and are still not ready to give up their positions. But why has the prolonged stay of African leaders in power become a critical conversation, and how does it impact democracy? The prolonged stay of African leaders in power has evolved into a pivotal discourse due to its impact on the democratic fabric of nations. Within African politics, a recurring theme is characterized by leaders hesitating to lose power voluntarily. This phenomenon has become a significant concern as leadership often correlates with an irreversible commitment, symbolizing a life or death scenario where the only exit appears in a coffin. This protracted tenure of political leaders presents a formidable challenge to the democratic ideals that underpin governance. Democracy, envisioned as a system by the people and for the people, encounters a crisis when leaders become entrenched in power for extended periods. The case of Uganda exemplifies this challenge, where a long-standing president has overseen the transformation of leadership into what resembles a familial enterprise. The question of whose government it truly is becomes paramount, and the democratic principle of representing the people becomes distorted when the citizenry no longer sees themselves reflected in those who govern. The impact on democracy extends beyond individual nations, as internal conflicts and violence often erupt when leaders resist relinquishing power against the people's will. This fear of losing control can lead to the suppression of alternative voices, stifling the growth of democracy. The scenario in Senegal, where the president contemplated a third term, is a poignant example, emphasizing the urgent need for a paradigm shift in the perception of power and leadership. But why do leaders seem reluctant to relinquish power willingly? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The reluctance of African leaders to willingly relinquish power stems from historical, cultural, and political factors. One prominent factor is the perception of leadership as a lifelong pursuit, where holding political office becomes synonymous with life and death. This mindset creates a sense of permanence and personal identity tied to political power, fostering a deep-seated reluctance to step down voluntarily. Moreover, the phenomenon is worsened by the prevalence of leaders who begin their political careers young, often ascending to power early in life. As a result, their identity becomes intertwined with their political roles, making the prospect of stepping aside a profound and challenging personal adjustment. The political landscape in many African nations has witnessed leaders who start their journeys as youthful figures, only to leave office in old age or through death, reinforcing the notion that political power is an enduring, lifelong commitment. Additionally, the fear of losing control and facing potential repercussions post-leadership contributes to this reluctance. Leaders worry about their safety, potential legal consequences, or the loss of privileges associated with their positions. This fear can lead to clinging to power as a means of self-preservation. The Ugandan case further exemplifies how power can become intertwined with family and close associates, transforming the leadership structure into a dynastic arrangement. This familial connection adds another layer of personal investment in maintaining power, as relinquishing it may impact not only the leader individually, but also their family and inner circle. What challenges has Uganda faced as a country with a president in power for nearly 3 decades, and how has the leadership structure transformed it into a family business? Uganda grapples with many challenges stemming from the prolonged tenure of its president, who has been in power for nearly 3 decades. One significant challenge lies in transforming the leadership structure into what can be described as a family business. Over the years, the president's family and close friends have assumed influential positions within the government, consolidating power and decision-making within a close-knit circle. This familial entrenchment raises critical questions about the inclusivity and representativeness of the government, leading to concerns about whose interests are genuinely being served. The emergence of a political dynasty in Uganda further heightens the challenges. With family members holding significant governmental positions, there is a risk of perpetuating a system where power is concentrated within a select group, hindering the principles of democracy. The key question arises: whose government is it? When leadership positions are seemingly reserved for those with familial ties to the head of state. This dynastic trend also presents challenges related to accountability and transparency. The intertwining of family and political power can create a lack of checks and balances, making it difficult to hold leaders accountable for their actions. As familial connections tighten, the potential for nepotism and favoritism in decision-making processes grows, undermining the principles of fair and just governance. The consequences extend beyond Uganda's borders, impacting the perception of democracy in the region. The transformation of leadership into a family business raises internal governance concerns and contributes to a broader narrative of democratic fragility. The challenges faced by Uganda exemplify the broader implications of prolonged leadership tenures and the potential erosion of democratic principles when power becomes concentrated within a select few with familial ties. But are there nations in Africa where democracy is being preserved? Yes. One such nation is Nigeria. Nigeria's recent elections offer valuable lessons, primarily reflecting a palpable desire for change among the populace. The elections witnessed a significant mobilization of the youth, signaling a collective yearning for a shift in leadership. This enthusiasm for change highlights a growing dissatisfaction with the status quo, particularly concerning the sustainability of governance by older leaders. The prevalence of older leaders, often grappling with health issues, has become a focal point of concern. The electorate's apprehensions about the longevity and effectiveness of governance under older leaders have prompted a re-evaluation of leadership dynamics. The Nigerian elections highlight the need for a transition to a new generation of leaders who can bring fresh perspectives, energy, and adaptability to the challenges faced by the nation. Furthermore, the reluctance of some older leaders to pass the baton to the younger generation emerges as a recurring problem in African politics. Nigeria's electoral landscape becomes a microcosm of this broader issue, emphasizing the importance of fostering a leadership environment that encourages intergenerational cooperation. The reluctance to embrace younger leaders can hinder the dynamism required to address evolving societal needs and navigate contemporary issues. But do the leaders not want to lose power because of them being used as puppets by external power? Leaders who align with the interests of external powers receive support, be it diplomatic, financial, or military. In such cases, the leaders perceive that stepping down could jeopardize these alliances or result in a loss of support. The fear of being replaced by a leader who is less amenable to external influences will contribute to their reluctance to relinquish power willingly. Additionally, leaders may be wary of potential consequences, such as legal actions or international scrutiny, if they were to step down. The dynamics of international politics and the influence of external actors can influence leaders' decisions, influencing their calculations about the risks and benefits of holding on to power.
And let us not fall into the patrimonialist academic viewpoints pushed by the IMF, World Bank, and all of that.
What reaction do locals have when such a thing happens? Do Africans support leaders who refuse to relinquish power? The reaction of locals to leaders who refuse to relinquish power varies, and there isn't a singular uniform response across the African continent. But it is mostly hated. When leaders extend their stay in power against the people's will, dissatisfaction and opposition often emerge among the local population. This discontent manifests through protests, demonstrations, or public outcry, reflecting a desire for change and a more democratic leadership. For example, the Ugandan case, where the president has been in power for nearly 3 decades, highlights the challenges posed by transforming the leadership structure into a family business. Such situations have led to a significant segment of the population questioning the legitimacy and fairness of the governance model, especially when political power appears concentrated within a select group. Contrastingly, Nigeria's recent elections provide a different narrative, showcasing a glimmer of hope as the youth rallied behind a candidate, signaling a desire for change. This suggests that, in certain instances, there is active support for new leadership, particularly among the younger demographic. What impact does it have on the growth of democracy if we take Senegal as an example? The impact of leaders clinging to power on the growth of democracy, as illustrated by the case of Senegal, is substantial and often detrimental. Internal conflicts and violence arise when leaders refuse to relinquish power against the people's will. This resistance to a peaceful transition of power can suppress alternative voices, hindering the organic development of democratic institutions. In Senegal, the president contemplated a third term, highlighting the challenges posed by leaders seeking to extend their tenure beyond established limits. Such actions not only erode the democratic principles of free and fair elections, but also undermine the core tenets of representative governance. When leaders prioritize their longevity over the democratic will of the people, it creates an atmosphere of political instability and can lead to a deterioration of democratic institutions. Furthermore, the case of Senegal highlights the need for a shift in the perception of power and leadership. The fear of losing control can prompt leaders to suppress alternative voices, stifling the growth of democracy. A true democracy thrives on diversity of opinion, open dialogue, and peaceful power transfer. When leaders resist this process, it hampers the evolution of democratic norms and values. How should past and present leaders confront these challenges for the continent's betterment? For the betterment of the continent, past and present leaders in Africa must confront the challenges of prolonged leadership tenures and the potential erosion of democratic principles. One crucial aspect is acknowledging that power should not be treated as a personal business, but as a service to the nation. Leaders, both past and present, should prioritize the welfare of their citizens over personal interests and work towards creating governance structures that are transparent, accountable, and inclusive. Addressing skewed pay disparities between politicians and essential professionals is paramount. To foster a system of accountability and discourage a self-perpetuating cycle of impunity, leaders should consider narrowing the gaps in compensation. This move can build trust among the public and ensure that the privileges associated with leadership align with the genuine service rendered to the nation. A significant shift in the perception of power and leadership is necessary. Past leaders can play a pivotal role by embracing their responsibilities as advisors rather than instigators of conflict. The wisdom accumulated during their time in office can be harnessed to guide and mentor the new generation of leaders, fostering a harmonious coexistence and ensuring a smooth transition of power. Prominent political figures such as Julius Malema, who call for a change in the narrative, should be listened to and their perspectives considered seriously. The continuity of democracy relies on former leaders actively shaping a political landscape that embraces diverse voices, encourages youth involvement, and prioritizes the nation's well-being. Now let's discuss Julius Malema's remarks. What perspective does this prominent African political figure bring to the conversation? A prominent African political figure, Julius Malema, injects a unique perspective into the conversation surrounding African leadership and democracy. His viewpoint emphasizes the importance of intergenerational cooperation and a shift in the narrative to ensure the continuity of democracy. Malema advocates for a graceful passing of the torch from the older generation to the younger, framing it as necessary to foster a harmonious coexistence within the political landscape. Malema's perspective aligns with the idea that former leaders should transition into roles as advisors rather than perpetuating conflicts. By encouraging the older generation to share their wisdom and experiences with the youth, Malema envisions a political environment where the two generations coexist harmoniously. This approach aims to bridge the gap between established political figures and emerging leaders, fostering collaboration and knowledge transfer. Malema proposes a transformation in the traditional power dynamics, urging former leaders to embrace their role as mentors and facilitators of positive change. By actively involving the younger generation in governance and decision-making processes, he envisions a political landscape that respects the contributions of experienced leaders and harnesses the energy and innovative ideas of the youth for the betterment of the continent. Malema's call for change is rooted in the belief that a harmonious coexistence between generations is crucial for the continuity of democracy. This perspective challenges the notion of leaders clinging to power for extended periods. It encourages a more dynamic and inclusive approach to leadership across different age groups, ensuring the longevity and adaptability of democratic principles in African nations. Is it urgent for African leaders to relinquish power gracefully as the continent approaches new elections and political transitions? As the continent approaches new elections and political transitions, African leaders must relinquish power gracefully. The urgency stems from the need to uphold and strengthen democratic principles, ensuring a smooth and peaceful leadership transition. Prolonged stays in power can lead to various issues, including the erosion of democratic institutions, suppression of alternative voices, and internal conflicts. The call for leaders to step down gracefully is essential for fostering political stability and preventing potential unrest during transitions. Timely and peaceful transfers of power contribute to building trust among the citizenry, enhancing the credibility of democratic processes, and creating a conducive environment for the growth of democracy. Moreover, the urgency is highlighted by the changing aspirations of the electorate, as seen in instances like Nigeria's recent elections, where the youth rallied behind a candidate signaling a desire for change. Embracing new leadership and perspectives becomes crucial for addressing evolving societal needs and ensuring governance that reflects the diversity and dynamics of the population. As Africa stands on the brink of new political phases, leaders' timely and graceful relinquishment of power becomes an important step for building resilient democracies. It is an opportunity for leaders to contribute positively to the continent's political landscape, fostering unity, transparency, and accountability while paving the way for a brighter and more inclusive future. Will these leaders, who have been in power for decades, give up their power? If not, will Africa rise as a continent? Whether leaders who have held power for decades will voluntarily give it up remains uncertain. It depends on various factors, including individual leaders' choices, external pressures, and the evolving political landscapes in their respective countries. History has shown leaders willingly stepping down, often in response to public pressure or diplomatic efforts. However, there have also been cases of leaders resisting calls for change and clinging to power. The ability of Africa to rise as a continent is not solely contingent on the relinquishment of power by long-standing leaders. Still, it is undoubtedly influenced by the nature of governance and the adherence to democratic principles. Peaceful transitions of power, whether through elections or other means, contribute to political stability, economic development, and social progress. If leaders entrenched in power for extended periods do not voluntarily step down, it can challenge the continent's growth. Persistent leadership can lead to political stagnation, hinder the emergence of new ideas, and contribute to governance issues. If the West turns out to be controlling these leaders and wants them to stay as its puppets, would African progress be possible?
When we are approaching an election, the leading presidential candidates are invited to a place called Chatham, and they are debating. It happened with Kenya in the run-up to the elections in 2022. It happened in Nigeria. I hope it will not happen in the case of Ghana and in the case of Zimbabwe. But it is a statement. You young boys, you are going to engage in what in our mind is essentially the appointment of a school head prefect or head girl. We want to assess how you debate and how you will behave when you ultimately become the head boy and the head girl. They don't say it in such crude terms, but I believe that that is what it is all about.
If it were the case that external influences, particularly from the West, were actively manipulating and supporting African leaders to stay in power as puppets, it could pose significant challenges to the progress of the continent. Such a scenario would likely contribute to political instability, hinder democratic development, and impede African nations' ability to pursue independent paths of growth and prosperity. External interference in sovereign nations' domestic affairs, aimed at propping up leaders who serve the interests of foreign powers, can result in governance prioritizing external agendas over the needs and aspirations of the local population. This could lead to a lack of genuine representation, economic inequality, and social unrest. For African progress to be possible, nations must have the autonomy to make independent decisions, pursue policies aligning with their developmental goals, and foster accountable and transparent governance. Addressing any undue influence from external actors would require a concerted effort from African leaders, civil society, and the international community to safeguard the principles of sovereignty and self-determination. Ultimately, Africa's path to progress involves addressing external pressures and building strong, accountable, and inclusive governance structures, prioritizing the people's well-being and the continent's sustainable development.
Every time, and that's the practice, the evidence shows that every time that Africa has had a good leader, white capital ensures that that good leader is brought down. Look at what happened to Muammar al-Gaddafi. This is somebody who produced the most prosperous nation on earth.
Do you support leaders who have been ruling African nations for decades? Should the people unite to make them empty their seats? Let us know in the comment section. Do you think they are Western puppets? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.